Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Matty here, and today we're going to be taking a look at all of the not so meta decks that actually did really well in competitions over this last week. So if anybody is new to the channel, which I assume most of you guys aren't, most of the time we cover what I believe are the best decks in the metagame for Pokemon TCG Pocket. I like to be as informative as I possibly can here on this channel. However, sometimes I like to showcase decks that aren't really considered, metagame, like super popular decks, but still did well in either, big tournaments or small tournaments over the last week of competition. Again, on Monday we did our meta report, and on Tuesday we did our tier list. This video was meant to come out Wednesday. I wasn't feeling great yesterday, so I didn't, manage to get this video out, but I typically do this every week, so I like to showcase some decks that aren't necessarily considered super popular or super meta. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do today. By the way, guys, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. The support has been incredible over the last few months. I really do appreciate it. Okay, let's get right into it. So the first deck I wanted to take a look at was going to be this Arceus Carnivine aggro deck that actually got, I believe, first place at the Faster Than Light tournament. A couple hundred players in this tournament. And if we look, this player lost its first match here against Weavile and Darkrai, which again is actually really interesting considering that this is a grass type aggro deck. We lost that first match, but then proceeded to win like every single match after that. We beat Gyarados, Metal Dialga and Arceus, Palkia, Gyarados again, a couple Rampardos Lucario decks, another Palkia, another Metal Lucario, and Rampardos deck and Magnezone, just basically beating all of the other top decks, considered the top decks of this format. Basically went 12-1 in this particular tournament, and this is the deck list. It's actually really interesting. So again, this is a kind of an aggro, aggressive turbo Arceus deck that's focused around the new Carnivine and Rotom cards, which again are both the Power Link and Speed Link sort of aggro variants to this whole, Arceus synergy package. So Carnivine's really interesting. Basically, I guess I could zoom in, but it's probably hard to read. You can just take my word for it. But Carnivine is a grass basic Pokemon, very similar to Skarmory, where it does 20 damage. However, if Arceus is in play on your bench, it actually does 50 damage for one grass energy. This is really substantial for a variety of different reasons. There's a lot of Pokemon right now in the format that are weak to grass. And again, I think it's really nice. I think it's honestly more consistent, in my opinion, to be playing this Carnivine than maybe to play Skarmory as well. It depends really how you're building the deck. To be fair, in this deck we have Rotom, but we also have Shaman as well, so entirely basic Pokemon in this deck, which is pretty cool. Rotom is also pretty cool as well, so it gets free retreat if Arceus is in play, but it's able to dash attack and for 1 energy just do 20 damage to a bench Pokemon. We also have Shaman, which is going to reduce the retreat cost of all of the Pokemon basically on our board here by 1, which gives basically everything free retreat other than Arceus gives a retreat cost of 1. But again, just a really aggressive deck. Both Rotom and Carnivine have low energy in their attack costs, so basically we get them out, we start attacking as early as possible, and then we set up our Arceus to just sort of sweep the rest of the game. Something like this is actually really interesting. I think these aggro decks do somewhat have a position in the format because you're able to go into like a Carnivine and then into a second Carnivine, or you can go Carnivine into Rotom, and then basically your opponent has to take 2 KOs and then also KO Arceus in the late game. It allows Arceus to probably have either the not Rocky Helmet, but Giant Cape in the late game, and then either one of your Carnivine or Rotom that we're using in the early game has Rocky Helmet to do some additional chip damage. There's a lot of decks in the format that aren't super explosive. Most of these decks are kind of tempo based. The most popular decks in the format are things like Leafeon, but also Dialga and Arceus. Those are decks that don't do a ton of damage until like turn 3 or turn 4, which should allow us to attack 2 or 3 times with Carnivine, and then again with Carnivine, and maybe even again as well, depending on what our matchups are looking like. But we have Giovanni, some extra damage modifiers, as well as Rocky Helmet, so we should honestly be getting pretty close to taking a KO between our first couple of Carnivines, and then in the late game go into our Arceus to finish things up. I think this is actually a really strong deck. Again, we can finish off KOs with Rotom on the bench. Very nice Pokemon indeed. We are running 2 copies of Cyrus and 1 Sabrina, 8 Pokemon, all basics in the deck, which is pretty cool. And again, a lot of flexibility in the retreat cost. I really like this deck, and again, this was a small tournament, but it performed really well. I'm not super surprised that a deck like this did do well, but I think it deserves to see more play, and I think as time goes on, we're going to see a lot of different ways to play Arceus that is actually pretty viable. We're going to actually take a look at a couple of them in this particular video. I know Arceus is a meta card, but this particular deck here isn't amongst the top most commonly played ways to play Arceus, so I wanted to include it in this video because, again, cards like Carnivine, Rotom, and particularly Sky Support Shaman, I think is one of the best new cards in the entire game. I think it allows a lot of flexibility in decks, and I think it's just a really strong effect there. So yeah, shout out to this player and shout out to this deck list. Next up, we're going to take a look here at an updated Fighting Magnezone deck that went 9-4 in the BEC Executive Series here. About 600 players in this tournament. Going 9-4 is pretty impressive. If we take a look at the matchups here, beating Articuno, we did lose to Executor, which again, this deck does probably lose to Executor. We lost to one Dialga and Arceus. We lost to an Articuno. Then we lost to a second Dialga and Arceus later in the tournament. However, we did beat that same player early on, or this player did rather. So we beat Dialga and Arceus actually a couple of times, beat Garchomp, beat Rampardos, beat Arceus Greninja. Really interesting matchup spreads for this deck list here, but honestly, I am actually really high on an archetype like this. I mentioned it a little bit in my meta report video, but I do think that the Marshadow Sudowoodo combination is actually really strong, or the Marshadow Hitmonlee combo. I think they're both pretty similar, but realistically, Marshadow is hitting for weakness on Arceus. So basically, being able to do, 120 damage to an Arceus EX is really substantial, especially considering the fact that we can, again, chip it down from the bench with Hitmonlee, or again, do 50 damage with Sudowoodo, which again does 20, but it does 30 more if our opponent's active Pokemon is an EX Pokemon. This card is actually really relevant in the format right now. I think it's a phenomenal card. Most decks right now are running EX Pokemon that are going to be in the active spot. A lot of decks are running basic EX Pokemon, and some of those, things like Arceus, which sometimes get caught in the active spot, are weak to fighting. So things like Sudowoodo and Marshadow are a really strong combination, similarly to what we saw in the last format, where instead of Sudowoodo, I think we were playing things like Farfetch'd or like Hitmonchan with Hitmonlee and Marshadow. And then again, we're playing Magnezone, and Magnezone is still pretty decent. I think it's been a little bit power crept. Its damage output isn't as relevant now when you consider that most decks are, running Pokemon with 140, 150 HP with giant capes, things like that. But again, I think realistically, it's still a really strong card. It's independent from everything else in the deck, right? It's basically this, aggro fighting Marshadow package, just with Magnezone thrown in there. There are still a lot of Pokemon weak to Electric type. Magnezone is still a good card. I don't think it's as good as it was last format, but I still think that this deck is actually really well positioned. And yeah, in general, I really like this particular strategy, and I think it deserves to see more play. Honestly, I think the Sudowoodo Marshadow combo is one of the best answers to Arceus in the entire game right now, and Arceus, of course, is probably the most played card and the most commonly seen card at the top of the metagame right now. And again, we are running Pokecom, XP, Giant Cape, one Sabrina, one Cyrus, one Mars as well. Mars is an interesting one, and it's a card that I actually think is fairly good in this particular format. I think a lot of decks really do kind of come down to having Cyrus in hand as their final win condition. So technically speaking, if your opponent only has one point or one prize left to take, playing a Mars could be the difference to get that Cyrus out of their hand, especially if the game doesn't go for too long, which again, they typically don't in this format, because again, it's sort of tempo based. Like games typically are ending right now on, turn 6 through turn 9. So most of the time, your opponent probably does have that Cyrus just sort of sitting in hand for the late game to win the game. So being able to shuffle that back into their hand, or into their deck rather, with Mars is actually a really interesting win condition. And I do think that Mars, especially in single prize archetypes, is actually a lot better than you might realize. I mean, I haven't tested it exclusively, but I have been Marsed a couple times since it came out. It's actually a pretty good card. I think it's a little bit underrated. In decks that have a little bit of extra room for supporter cards, I think it can be pretty relevant. Again, there's no real way to play around it in Pokemon Pocket. Like, you kind of have to just play the game. It's not like you can, sequence properly or like protect yourself from any sort of hand disruption. It just sort of happens sometimes. But if it does happen and it works out, it's actually a pretty strong card. But yes, overall, I think that Fighting Magnezone, this is sort of an updated version of it. This isn't, anything new. We've seen the fighting package with Magnezone before. In fact, it was one of the best counter meta decks of last format. Its win rate was always really high. And I think that it has a chance. I think it has the potential to be a very similar deck in this format. Again, fighting decks are kind of on the rise, but you don't have to play, Rampardos or Gallade to take those 1-hit KOs on Arceus. Why not just play things like Hitmonlee, Sudowoodo, and then, do that 120 damage with Marshadow? It's actually a really strong combination. I expect to see more decks like this incorporating Sudowoodo and Marshadow. We'll have to see. Again, I do think that they're really strong cards in this particular new format. Next up is going to be a Leafeon deck. This is just one that I found to be kind of interesting. This deck went 7-3 at the Ursa Days Pocket Weekly this past weekend, so it didn't make day 2, but it had a pretty good run in day 1. So winning 3 matches right off the bat against Darkrai, Dialga Arceus, another Leafeon deck, beating Darkrai, beating Executor, beating Articuno, and then beating Darkrai or being Dialga and Arceus. So it did lose a couple times to Dialga, which, you know, these grass decks oftentimes do. I think that's one of the main limiting factors to Leafeon, is that they just don't have enough front-loaded damage to deal with sort of that high HP tempo and high damage, honestly, from Arceus and Dialga and Arceus. But anyway, this deck is interesting. So it's literally just Leafeon, but we're not playing Irida or Water Energies or anything like that. We're going just straight alternate attacking option, and we're playing Mew EX in the deck. And this may seem really strange, but realistically, you got to understand that if you're going up against Dialga and Arceus, which you oftentimes will, and you're playing these grass type decks, Solar Beam just doesn't really cut it from a damage output perspective. It's 70 damage, but, you know, with giant capes, with potions, like a lot of times Pokemon are living 2 hits from a Solar Beam. So it doesn't feel very great for your Leafeon to not really have that much damaging potential. But one thing that you got to realize is that sometimes you lead off with Celebi as well, and leading off with Celebi can honestly be even a little bit better in that Dialga matchup, especially if you're going second, gives you a higher chance to actually KO that Dialga. And then what we can also do if we are still leading with Leafeon is we can actually choose to attach energies to Mew EX, which is getting KO'd without Giant Cape from Arceus, but we are doing 130 damage to an Arceus. So it's a little bit more of a significant combination here. I think that it's actually a pretty good inclusion in these grass decks. Now, unfortunately, we cannot use Force Breath to accelerate those energies to Mew EX, but if you kind of think about it, it's actually not that bad of a deal. A lot of times we would be doing 2 grass energies per turn, setting up that Celebi, but that may not also be the best case scenario. Maybe we're going up against a deck that Mew EX is actually really good against. So I've seen a lot of different ways to play Leafeon, but I actually kind of think that Mew EX is pretty good in Leafeon right now. I just wanted to showcase it. It's anything super crazy or super special. It is Leafeon. It's one of the most common decks in the format, but I haven't really seen a lot of people play Mew EX, and I actually think it could be pretty decent in this list. Again, if we were to talk a little bit just about whether or not to play Water Energies and play Irida in Leafeon, I don't think you're actually getting as much value in it right now. The way I think about it is like Arceus is hitting you for 260 in 2 turns, right? It's doing 130 and 130. No matter how much healing we're able to do, whether we are playing Erica's or Irida, and potions or Giant Cape, we're not getting that 260 HP threshold, right? We're getting 2 KO'd by Arceus no matter what. So the healing really doesn't matter that much in the most significant of matchups. I think that Giant Cape, Potions, and Erica's is still important because, again, like you are going to be hit by Metallic Turbo a couple times. We would rather keep our HP up, so that we're not just getting 1 KO by the Arceus when it comes in. But either way, I think that this deck with Mew EX is actually a little bit more versatile, and I'll have to test it myself, but I just thought it was a little bit interesting. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it because it's not anything super new. Next up is going to be Arceus and Manaphy. It's basically a water type Arceus deck. And actually, when this set came out, this was a type of deck that I actually considered playing and building right off the gate. It was one of the things that I initially thought would be super good. And really, what you're doing in this deck, well, I guess we'll pull up the deck list. Really, what we're doing in this deck is using Manaphy's Oceanic Gift to set up our Arceuses on our bench. And then from there, we're able to heal up with Irida. And it's actually a really interesting strategy. You basically play a water deck, but without Palkia or Articuno or anything like that. We're just playing Arceus, and Arceus does do more damage than things like Articuno. We don't have access to Misties in the deck, but typically that's not that bad of a deal. The other cool thing about this deck is that with Shaman, with Manaphy, with Arceus, and Dawn, technically speaking, we should be able to sometimes and fairly consistently attack with Ultimate Force on our second turn. Very similar to other Dawn strategy combos. Basically, we're cheating an extra energy on Arceus to potentially be able to attack a turn earlier. Manaphy, if we have enough Pokemon on our bench, Manaphy can accelerate energies to maybe a second Arceus or a Shaman that's on our bench. And that's really the combo, right? So you Oceanic Gift, 1 to Arceus, 1 to like a Shaman on your bench. And then next turn, you can manually attach to Arceus, free retreat out of the active spot with Manaphy because we have the Sky Support Shaman. And then if we have Dawn in hand, we can move that energy from Shaman to Arceus and then hit for Ultimate Force on turn 2. It's actually a really strong combo deck, and it's a little bit more explosive. And even if we don't get the full combo off on our early game, we're still just having a very consistent Arceus deck. We're able to attack turn after turn, and I think that's actually fairly underrated. We have the new Celestic Town Elder to be able to put some additional basic Pokemon on our bench to guarantee that we're doing that full damage with Arceus. We're playing 1 Giovanni in the deck, which I do think Giovanni is fairly good with Arceus. Somebody was saying that the effect doesn't work with Arceus, but I think it does. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure I've used Giovanni with Arceus before, and I've seen it being used, but I don't know. And only one Irida. Now, like I said, the healing can be a factor in a variety of different matchups. If I was playing this deck, maybe I would cut one Town Elder, or maybe one Shaman, or maybe one Giovanni, things like that, and I would run maybe 2 Irida. We're also not playing Cyrus in the deck, but I don't think you really need to run Cyrus in this particular list. Basically, we're just playing, Sabrina and Arceus. I think that's kind of the one downside to this list, is that we don't have any additional damage modification other than Giovanni. So with Giant Capes, the thing with Arceus is it's got kind of an awkward damage output where you're doing 130, and that is enough to 2-hit KO any Pokemon in the game, but we're not 1-hit KOing a lot of Pokemon in the game. So that's why we oftentimes see Arceus paired with things like Dialga, which can do additional damage with Metallic Turbo, or we play it with Crobat or Carnivine to do whatever damage early on in the game, and then you add on the 130, and that should be enough to finish off KOs. This deck is a little bit more reliant on just getting an earlier Ultimate Force attack off, which is effectively the same thing as if we were just Metallic Turboing. It's a little bit less consistent, I think, than Metallic Turbo, but like I said, it's a really, really fun strategy, and I think it's really cool to be able to bounce between Arceuses really effectively with Sky Support Shaman, with Dawn, and again, like I said, pop off and just attack for Ultimate Force a turn earlier. This particular player here lost to Infernape and Moltres, which again is interesting. We're not hitting for weakness, right? Infernape is actually a pretty good counter to Arceus. We beat Garchomp, lost to a Garchomp, beat Gyarados, beat Darkrai, lost to Darkrai, beat another Arceus Lucario deck, beat Darkrai Crobat, beat Palkia, and then beat Dialga in Arceus. So it had a pretty decent run. Like I said, it just missed out on day 2, but I actually think it's one of my favorite new strategies in the game. I think that Dawn is honestly my favorite card. If we had a more consistent way to get Dawn in our hand early in the game, it would be so fun. But whenever we're playing a combo deck with Dawn and we do get that combo early, it can honestly win you the game. It's just so cool to be able to attack a turn earlier with some of these really strong Pokemon. And we've seen it in a variety of different ways. In fact, it's played in Infernape. It was played in some Magnezone decks with like Zapdos. That's the other combo deck basically with Arceus, is that we could just play the Magnezone variant or the Magnezone line and use electric energies and move that extra energy from Magneton to Arceus with Dawn. I think that's also a totally fine strategy. We don't have access to Irida, so I think that there's two kind of combo Arceus decks that are both really, really good. This one is a little bit more focused on being able to heal with Irida, but the other one that we've seen a little bit, I think I talked about it previously, is being able to just sort of have an additional attacker with the lightning type attacker with Magnezone. So they're pretty cool. Next up though, let's take a look at this other Arceus deck. So this one's a little bit similar to the other one. It's a water type Arceus deck, but we're actually using the new Abomasnow. And this deck did pretty well. Also, it was from the Dark League Classic Wednesday. I think 200-300 players were in this tournament. We went 8-2, which is pretty interesting. We did make top 16 cut, beating a lot of top decks in day 1. We did lose to Palkia. We had a bye. We beat Arceus, and then we lost to Rampardos and Lucario. But overall, 8-2 is not very bad. Really 7-2, but still a pretty good run for this particular deck here. And like I said, very similar to that other deck we were playing with Dawn, with Manaphy, with Arceus. But now we're actually playing the new Vigor Link Abomasnow, which actually is really, really interesting. So you can attack for 2 energies on this thing. 120 HP, Mega Punch, 80 damage for 2 energies. It's not terrible. It's just a little bit interesting being able to potentially live an attack with Giant Cape with Abomasnow. It's just kind of funny. Like, it's a really interesting card where at first glance it doesn't seem that good, but it really isn't that bad. I think there might be better options, of course, but I don't think it's a terrible card. And again, when we're pairing it with Oceanic Gift Manaphy, we're pairing it with Dialga, or not Dialga, rather Palkia and Arceus, it's actually a pretty strong card. We are running Irida as well. We can run Misties, we can run Leaf, Dawn, Giant Cape, Research, all of the good stuff in this deck. So it's just sort of a different variant of a lot of the same type of water decks that we've seen previously. Water just has a lot of really fun Pokemon, so this was a version of a water type deck that I didn't actually really see much up until now, and it kind of makes sense to me. Honestly, this wouldn't be something that, as far as the water type goes, that I would have chosen to play before some of the other water decks, but again, water is just really strong. Abomasnow is kind of an underrated card, and we still have access to Dimensional Storm and Ultimate Force, some really, really strong attacks. Again, Manaphy, it's just overall a really impressive card, and it can enable a lot of other really impressive attackers here. Irida able to really heal up everything in our deck as well, because it doesn't matter if we're a water type Pokemon or not. All we need is the water energies attached. Again, Irida, really, really strong card, and we have some Dawn shenanigans as well. I really like this list. Again, it's similar to the other one. It's less combo based and more just sort of a water toolbox deck with sort of an Arceus variant thrown in, but I really like it. I think it's really, really cool, and yeah, I just wanted to showcase this deck as well. And then this one's kind of a meme, but I wanted to just showcase it. I wouldn't take this one too seriously. This is from Pokemon Battle Park Pocket. I think this had about 100 and 200 players in it. And this is a Garchomp and Gallade deck. So it went 6-3, pretty like average in a small tournament. So this is nothing to like, go crazy about. But we beat Gyarados, beat Darkrai, beat Leafeon, beat a Machamp deck, beat Dialga Arceus, beat Gallade and Hitmonlee, and then we lost to Dialga Arceus, we lost to Rampardos, and we lost to Palkia. But look at this deck list here, and just tell me that this isn't something that you would enjoy trying to play at some point. It's just really funny. Like, a deck like this is actually, again, at first glance, it just doesn't seem like it makes any sense. Why would you play a deck like this? But to be honest with you, it's really not that bad. When you're playing a deck that is almost entirely Pokemon, you're bound to evolve into either Gallade or Garchomp pretty early on. We're running 2 Pokemon Communications, 2 Pokeball, 2 Cyrus, 2 Professor's Research. Really what we're doing in this deck is hoping that we kind of high roll. We draw all of the Pokemon. By turn 3, we have Gallade and Garchomp set up, and we can kind of just go back between the two. If you didn't know, Gallade and Garchomp have both really low energy attack costs, and they can retreat for only 1 energy, which means basically our opponent has to go through a 170 HP Garchomp and a 170 HP Gallade, which are both hitting for weakness on things like Arceus. So it's really funny. It will struggle in aggro decks where, some decks are doing a lot of damage early on, but again, this is a tempo-based format, so most decks really aren't threatening until turn 3 or turn 4. By then, we should have our Gallade and our Garchomp set up and just ready to do a lot of damage. High HP Pokemon, all fighting type. It's actually really funny. And like I said, between all of the Pokemon, by all the Pokeballs, by all the Pokemon Communications, we should pretty reliably be able to evolve at least one of these Pokemon by turn 3 and just start going off to the races. It's honestly not as bad as I initially would have thought. This reminds me honestly of the Charizard decks of the old format that were running just a ton of Pokemon because you just were bound to draw into them. Decks like this we haven't seen much because technically speaking, Pokemon Communications is really only efficient when you're running a lower amount of HP or not HP, less quantity of different Pokemon in your deck, because then you're guaranteed to swap out that one Pokemon in your hand with the Pokemon that you're looking for in your deck. But in a deck like this, we're just kind of hoping to pull something out of our deck that's useful, right? But we're running so many Pokemon, like chances are we could use that Pokemon to evolve, you know what I mean? Like at every stage, there's 4 different Pokemon that are either basic stage 1 or stage 2. So, we kind of have to mix and match a little bit, but that's what Pokemon Communications allows us to do. Honestly, guys, this deck is better than you might assume. Trust me, like if you play test a deck like this, it may brick here or there, but like again, depending on the matchups, like if you are allowed to just sort of set up for 3 turns, like this deck can be very dangerous. And 170 HP is a lot on both of these Pokemon. Nothing's really one KOing us. Charizard's not seeing that much play, and like I said, hitting for weakness on Arceus is pretty relevant as well. Just a really funny deck, and I wanted to showcase it in this video for you guys. And next up, we just have a Electro-type sort of tempo-based Pachirisu Zapdos deck. Things like this sort of see play from time to time. This deck went 7-3 at the Faster Than Light tournament. Again, I think 200-300 players in this particular tournament. 9-3, we had a bunch of wins against other meta decks. We did lose to Dialga and Arceus once, lost to Weavile Darkrai once, and we lost to Dialga and Arceus again. So this is a deck that's definitely not going to be super strong against Dialga and Arceus, but a lot of water decks running around, so these sort of, tempo-based Electro-type decks are actually probably a little bit better in the format than you might think. But the other cool thing here is it's a very consistent deck. We're utilizing Pachirisu, Zapdos, and Shaman. Just maximum consistency here, basically. Being able to Sparking Gadget very consistently here, getting out of the active spot for free with Zapdos with Sky support, and then vice versa. If we wanted to, again, go into Zapdos from Pachirisu, we can do that. The other real downside to this deck, in my mind, is that these Pokemon just don't have that much HP. Yes, we're running 2 giant capes, but realistically, Arceus is probably getting the KO on either of these Pokemon after a Metallic Turbo or after some sort of additional damage modifier, which I think is really the only downside to this deck. If these Pokemon both had like 140 HP, I think this deck would actually be very good and very consistent. 80 damage with Sparking Gadget on turn 2 for 2 energies is good. It really is. And Zapdos is kind of a high roller card, if I'm being honest with you. If I was going to play this deck, I probably would have just swapped out Zapdos for Arceus, if I'm being honest with you. But that's just my opinion. Either way, I think it's actually pretty decent. Again, we're playing Dawn, we're playing Mars as well with Cyrus, 4 tool cards, Potions, Sabrinas, It's just a kind of a really consistent kind of tempo-based electric type deck that honestly is fairly well positioned in the format right now. I don't have too much else to say about this. I haven't talked a lot about electric type because a lot of people really aren't playing electric type decks that aren't Magnezone. So I really wanted to include this. I still think that Pachirisu is a good card. I think it's a little bit underrated right now. 80 damage times 2 is 160. So if you're able to get 2 attacks off with Pachirisu, again, it's a deck that really loves to go second. But if you do go second with Pachirisu, you should be able to win games pretty consistently and do quite a lot of damage and potentially KO most Pokemon in the game by turn 2. It's a really, really strong card. I actually really like Pachirisu. It counters Dialga fairly well, if we're being honest with you. But yeah, another Sky Support Shaman Dawn card combo that I really, really like. I just love Sky Support Shaman. I love Dawn. I think they can squeeze into a lot of different decks. This is just one example, but I wanted to again showcase something electric type because we haven't really talked about it much this format. I still think that electric type is one of the strongest types in the game. It's just been power crept a little bit, and the overall damage output basically, like, because the format is very tempo based, and you know we have Dialgas, Palkias, Arceuses, just a lot of HP doing a lot of damage. These electric type Pokemon are just maybe not as fast enough or don't have enough HP to really be worth it, but not a bad deck, honestly. It really isn't. And then lastly is we're going to talk about Starmie. So this is a Starmie deck with Palkia. They went 11-1 here at the something tournament here. I don't know how to pronounce that. But 11-1 is really, really impressive. Again, our only loss was in our first match of the tournament against Lucario Rampardos, but ended up beating basically every deck after that. A lot of definitely pretty relevant decks here in this players' matchups for this tournament. And as we see, this is actually basically just Starmie. This is literally Starmie, and I actually think that Starmie is a lot better now with Irida. It's a card that I think a lot of people wrote off, but again, we're in a tempo-based format, so a card like Starmie with Giant Cape going to 150 HP, with the potions, with Irida, with the free retreat, with the low energy attack cost, boosted by Misty's and Palkia on the back end, I actually really, really love this deck. I think that this is something that we're not really talking about enough. I personally think that Starmie is much better right now than we are giving it credit for. Again, we haven't really seen Starmie since like the Genetic Apex days. It saw a little bit of play, I think, in the Mythical Island format, but Starmie is actually really, really good. I think that there's enough support around it right now. Again, with Misty, with Palkia as a backup attacker, with Cyrus, Irida, Giant Cape, potions, the free retreats, 150 HP, living hits, healing up pretty consistently, early damage, 2-hit killing anything in the format. Starmie is much, much better than we are giving it credit for. I really, really like it. And again, we're not getting sort of outpaced or out-aggroed by Electric-type decks. Magnezone is sort of on the down low. Not a lot of people are playing it right now. Electric-type in general, not many people are playing. I think Starmie is actually a really good Pokemon and a really good card in this format. That is just my opinion. So that's what I wanted to finish off this video talking about, was Starmie. This might be a surprise to you guys, but yeah, I'm actually really high on Starmie, particularly this Starmie deck. I'm gonna have to test it myself. I know the Emblem event is going on right now, so I wish all of you guys the best of luck. I might make a video tomorrow about what I consider to be probably the best decks to play for this Emblem event to get your 5 wins in a row. But, you know, again, most of the decks that we talk about in our videos that are meta decks, you know, we're kind of giving you all the tools and all the information in general, but oftentimes when you're playing the Emblem events, you probably want to play sort of the counter meta decks that are going to be good against the decks that you're most likely going to be playing against on the random battles or the you know, event battles in game. So maybe I'll make a video on that tomorrow. Maybe I'll do a specific you know, deck list. Maybe I'll talk about Starmie. Who knows? I might make a video on this deck because I think it's actually really, really good. But anyway, guys, we're gonna peace out. Have a good one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay tuned for more videos. Again, I apologize for not recording or uploading anything tomorrow or yesterday. I just didn't feel that good. But we're back at it. We're back at it, and I think there's actually a lot of decks in this format that not many people are playing, that aren't getting as much publicity, that I think are actually really, really good. I think early formats can go really 2 different ways. They can really funnel up to the top and have most people play the, you know, top 2, top 3 decks, or they can be really well spread out. And I think that we have enough Pokemon in the game and we have enough really good strategies in Pokemon Pocket right now that as time goes on, I think our metagame's actually going to become even more diverse as time goes on. At least that's what I'm hoping. But I guess we'll have to see. But yeah, I'm gonna peace out, guys. Have a good one. We'll see you guys tomorrow. And yeah, bye.